Hey, this is Jürgen Rasmussen. Welcome to the Provocative Hypnosis Vlog. This is a short and sweet episode about how deep psychological transformations occur. What is the essence of psychological growth? That's a key question. So let me start off with a little story. I have a friend who once took his two kids on top of the London Eye. And one of the kids said, I think one of the kids was like 3.5 and the other was 7, something like that. And one of the kids said, "Look at those small people down there." And the older brother, who was 7, said, "Ah, you idiot, it only looks that way." And I love this example because it could have been taken out of a book on child developmental psychology. Let me introduce two quick concepts. One is subject and the other is object. So when I use the word subject here, I refer to that which experiences something, the subject. When I use the word object, I'm referring to that which is experienced. Something is taken as object. So Carl Jung used to say that some ideas, some assumptions have us. We're essentially mouthpieces for those deep assumptions and ideas. We're mouthpieces for them. They speak through us. We see the world through them. And when we see the world through a particular assumption or idea, it doesn't look like an assumption or an idea. It just looks like reality with a capital R. It just looks like how things really are, or reality. And it looks like us. So the idea that have us, that we're subject to, essentially fundamentally look like reality and look like who we are. The ideas that you have are the ideas that you can look at, that you can have a relationship to. Those are the ideas that you can take as object and have some choice about. So in the example with the two kids I just mentioned, you could say that the 3.5-year-old was subject to his perceptions. Look at those small people down there. The older kid, it still looked as if there were a bunch of small people down there, but he had the ability to take his perceptions as object to some extent. Take as object as in have a relationship to, be able to reason about, as in, yeah, it looks that way, but it's not really that way. So what was subject for the younger brother was object to the older brother, right? Now, when clients come in to see you, they are always subject to a bunch of ideas and assumptions. And these ideas and assumptions have them. It just looks like reality. It just looks like how things are. It just looks like objective truth. Looks like who they essentially are. If you want to set the stage for a psychological transformation or for psychological growth, what you want to do is to create a learning context where what was subject can now become object, where the ideas that they viewed the world through suddenly become something that they can look at. look at, and thereby have a relationship to, and to contextualize, and to make distinctions about. What you're subject to at one stage of development becomes the object of the subject at the next stage of development. I'll say that again. What you're subject to, looking at the world through at one stage of development, becomes the object, what you can look at, from the position of the more evolved subject, so to speak. So from a developmental perspective, you could say that self is not a thing, it's an activity. It's the process of selfing, the activity of selfing, right? So the activity of selfing, psychological growth, happens when what looked like me, what looked like I, who I fundamentally am, is taken as object, becomes an idea, a perspective, a perception of the next subject, right? So when you look at topics such as anxiety, or whenever people are seriously stuck, thoughts and feelings only really, bother them when they look like a self, when it looks as if I am these thoughts and feelings. These thoughts and feelings am me. I'm subject to them. And you can learn to spot this by noticing what's self and what's not self in the client's story. What's absolute and what's relative in the client's story. What's a strong either or with emotion attached to it compared to what's a both and. So if you can get good at noticing what's self and what's other, what's absolute, what's relative, what's an emotionally charged either or, and where does the person have more of a both and perspective, if you can have some surgical precision about helping the client to create a learning context around that, then you have the opportunity for profound, deep psychological change. Profound, deep psychological change. Because what was absolute and had to be a particular way now might become a mere preference. What looked like who you fundamentally are becomes another concept, another idea. So that's really important. A lot of people use words like transformation a lot. You'll see this in advertising. Transform your consciousness, or transform your mind. You can't really transform consciousness. You are an appearance in consciousness. Not the other way around. But if you look at the words information and transformation, if you break it down into inform and transform, you'll see that when we give people information, they're taking data and ideas and they're putting them into a particular way of understanding that was present before the encounter. So inform. You're taking perhaps new information, but you're putting it into an old form. Another word for form is just a way of understanding. Transformation is about changing the form updating the form, meaning changing the way you understand. So it's not just about taking new information and putting it into an old form. It's about helping someone to change the way they understand, the way they fundamentally understand something. That's what a transformation is about. And when transformations happen, there is usually a deep generative change going on. So there's a world of difference between information and transformation. Some change work you can do in the realm of information. But for some clients in some life contexts, their very way of understanding themselves in the world is not quite up to par for the kind of demands of reality or the demands of the context that they're in. These people very often need a transformation, meaning a fundamental new way of understanding something. Now, when enough ideas or deep assumptions that were subject begin to be taken as objects, when really emotionally laden deep assumptions that you were subject to become something you can look at, sometimes an entire meaning-making system can change. An entire meaning-making system can change. So, for example, if we go back to the fundamental idea or story I started with the two kids, you could say that the kind of magical thinking that young kids have a tendency to engage in, where they go up in the air, other people become smaller. They don't have the notion of durable categories yet. When people are able to take their perceptions as object to some extent, they evolve into a much more concrete way of understanding. The 7-year-old's way of understanding is different. It's an old myth that we develop psychologically until we're perhaps 20 or so, and then we don't change. But change is as dramatic in subject-object relationship as between the 3.5-year-old in this example and the 7-year-old is also possible in adult human beings. Two 30-year-olds, two 50-year-olds can operate from different meaning-making systems. Now, in general, it's better, I would say, to have a more complex meaning-making system, as it offers more choice and more perceptual flexibility. But for the most part, it's a matter of functional fit. Does the meaning-making system you have, is it a functional fit for your particular life circumstances and the contexts that you operate in? So I hope this was useful. If these ideas about developmental psychology and meaning-making systems resonate with you, I would encourage you to read Robert Kegan's book, In Over Our Heads. Start with the chapter called The Undiscussed Demands of Psychotherapy. It's a really good chapter. And if that stuff resonates, I've written a whole book called Provocative Suggestions, which essentially integrates more state-based approaches like NLP, hypnotherapy, rational emotive behavior therapy, meditation approaches within a adult developmental psychology framework, mostly using Robert Kegan's model. I've studied several others. I've studied spiral dynamics, Graves, ego development, but I find Robert Kegan's model to be the most useful for client work. So anyways, if these ideas resonate and you want to get in touch with me, work with me, you can find me at provocativehypnosis.com. Also, if you have any questions, comments, feel free to leave them wherever you find this particular video. Hope this was useful. Thanks.